You think you need a GPS to find your way. But ancient nomads saw the world completely differently. While we stare at blue dots on screens, they were reading the lean of wind-bent grass and the shifting humidity of the horizon. They didn't just travel. They decoded the Earth's secrets. And what they understood about navigation has been completely lost, replaced by satellite signals and app notifications. But here's the part that changes everything. They were more lost than us and less lost than us in exactly the same moment. Imagine being dropped in a vast, featureless desert right now. No phone, no map, no GPS. For you, this would be terror. For ancient nomads, this was just Tuesday. It wasn't because they had better tools. It was because they had a completely different operating system in their brains. We navigate using coordinates, latitude and longitude, external reference points that someone else designed, that someone else maintains, that could disappear tomorrow. Ancient nomads navigated using something else entirely. They navigated using their bodies, their senses, their intuition, and a level of attention to the world that most modern humans have completely forgotten. But here's what's strange. The more we've advanced our navigation technology, the worse we've become at actually finding our way. We know this from research. People today get lost faster, panic sooner, and have lower confidence in their own sense of direction than any previous generation in human history. We've outsourced wayfinding to our phones. And in the process, we've atrophied the internal compass that took our ancestors millions of years to develop. Let's start with the most basic question: how did they do it? The answer is, they used everything. Modern navigation is specialized. We use maps for visual orientation. We use compasses for direction. We use GPS for coordinates. We separate out different types of information and use different tools for each one. Ancient nomads didn't have that luxury. They had to integrate every single piece of sensory information their brains could access into one unified navigation system. This wasn't a weakness. It was the entire strength. They read the wind. Not metaphorically. Literally. They understood that wind patterns were consistent. The prevailing wind from the west means you're in certain latitudes. A shift in wind direction signals a change in terrain. A sudden temperature drop in the wind means a storm's coming or water's nearby. By feeling the wind on their skin, they were gathering data. They read the sun. Obviously, the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. But ancient nomads knew so much more than that. They knew the precise angle of the sun at different times of day in different seasons. They knew how to calculate their latitude just by observing the sun's trajectory. They knew how far north or south they traveled by tracking the sun's position relative to familiar landmarks. This wasn't taught in a classroom. This was embodied knowledge developed through years of observation. They read the stars. This is where it gets profound. Star navigation isn't just about finding north using Polaris. It's an entire language of the night sky. Different cultures developed different systems. Polynesian navigators learned to read star paths, imagining constellations as moving GPS coordinates that shifted across the sky with the seasons. Aboriginal navigators in Australia created songlines, journeys that followed particular stars across the sky, and the songs encoded both the star positions and the terrain below. But here's the part that really matters. They weren't just reading individual signals. They were integrating them all into one coherent map. They read the landscape itself. Every hill, every valley, every rock formation tells a story. Ancient nomads didn't just notice these features. They memorized them. They created mental maps so detailed that they could navigate across hundreds of miles of featureless desert and know exactly where they were. But how? There are no landmarks in the desert. That's where it gets interesting. There are always landmarks. You just have to know how to read them. They read the patterns in the sand. Wind patterns create consistent shapes in desert sand. These patterns aren't random. They're predictable. Experienced navigators could read these patterns and understand the wind currents that shaped them, which told them their latitude and longitude relative to known reference points. They read the vegetation. In arid environments, plants don't grow randomly. They grow where water is. And ancient nomads knew this. They understood which plants indicated underground water sources, which plants only grew in certain regions, which species marked the transition between different climate zones. By observing vegetation, they were essentially reading geological maps written in living organisms. They read the animals. Migration patterns of animals are incredibly consistent. Certain birds migrate at certain times. Certain animals gather at certain water sources. By observing animal behavior, ancient nomads could infer where they were and where water, food, and shelter would be found. They read the sky itself. And I don't just mean the stars. I mean the atmosphere. The color of the sky at the horizon tells you about distant weather systems. The scent of the air tells you about distant vegetation and water. The humidity level tells you about how far you are from the ocean or from rain systems. They were reading the atmosphere like a weather map. They read the earth beneath their feet, the texture of the soil, the way it compacts under their weight, the temperature of the ground, the mineral content they could taste. All of this was data. All of this was feeding into their internal navigation system. And here's the part that most people miss. They weren't doing this consciously. They weren't thinking, okay, the wind is from the west at 15 degrees Celsius, the stars show I'm at this latitude, the vegetation indicates I'm in this region, therefore I should go northeast. They were doing something far more sophisticated. They were developing an intuitive, embodied sense of where they were. Their brains were integrating all of this sensory information into what researchers call a cognitive map, an internal representation of space that was constantly being updated and refined. This is what we've lost. This intuitive sense of direction. This ability to feel your way through space using your senses as navigation instruments. Modern research is starting to understand how this works. Neuroscientists have discovered that the human brain has dedicated navigation circuits. Specific neurons that fire in specific patterns when you move through space. These are called place cells and grid cells. And they're incredibly sophisticated. What's fascinating is that these navigation circuits don't just use visual information. They integrate information from all your senses simultaneously. Your inner ear balance system, your proprioception, your sense of your own body in space, your visual system, your sense of touch, your sense of smell. All of this is being woven together into one unified map. Ancient nomads were using all of this. They were training these navigation circuits constantly. Every day, they were paying attention to their senses, integrating new information, refining their internal maps. Over years and decades, they developed extraordinary abilities. But here's what happened. We invented technology. Compasses. And suddenly, we didn't need these internal navigation systems anymore. We could outsource wayfinding to external tools. At first, this seemed like progress. We could navigate faster. We didn't have to memorize routes. We didn't have to pay constant attention to our surroundings. Technology was doing the work for us. But there was a cost. As we stopped using these navigation circuits, they atrophied. Our brains are plastic. They reorganize based on what we use them for. If you stop using your navigation circuits, your brain will reorganize those neural pathways for other purposes. You become dependent on external navigation tools. And if those tools fail, you're helpless. This is exactly what research shows. People raised with GPS have significantly weaker navigational abilities than people raised without it. They panic faster when they get lost. They have lower confidence in their own sense of direction. They're more easily disoriented. But there's something else happening too. Something more subtle. Ancient nomads didn't just navigate using their senses. They navigated using something deeper. A kind of attentional presence. A way of being in the world where you're constantly aware, constantly paying attention, constantly integrating information. Modern life is the opposite. We're distracted. We're absorbed in our phones. We're not paying attention to the world around us. We're navigating our internal digital maps instead of the actual geography we're moving through. And what researchers are discovering is that this shift has profound consequences. Not just for wayfinding, but for our entire sense of self. Navigation circuits in the brain are connected to memory circuits, to emotional circuits, to our sense of identity. When ancient nomads navigated, they weren't just finding their way. They were remembering. Remembering the routes their ancestors had taken. Remembering stories associated with particular landmarks. Remembering their place in the larger community and the larger world. Modern navigation is disconnected from all of this. When we follow GPS, we're not engaging our memory. We're not telling stories. We're just following directions. It's navigation stripped of everything except the coordinates. But here's what's really interesting. Some ancient cultures went even further. They didn't just navigate using individual sensory cues. They integrated all of this into larger systems of meaning. The Aboriginal Australians developed songlines, epic journeys told through song that encoded both geographic information and cultural meaning. By singing the songlines, you were simultaneously navigating the land and participating in your culture's sacred stories. Polynesian navigators developed wayfinding traditions that incorporated not just observations of stars and weather, but also deep knowledge of human nature. They understood that wayfinding wasn't just a technical skill. It was a way of being present with the ocean, the sky, and each other. These cultures understood something we've forgotten. Navigation is not separate from meaning. Finding your way through the world is the same as finding your way through life. The skills are the same. The awareness is the same. This is why modern navigation feels so hollow. We can follow our GPS and never be lost. But we're also never truly found. We never arrive anywhere. We just consume coordinates and move on to the next destination. Ancient nomads understood something different. They understood that finding your way wasn't about reaching a destination. It was about the journey itself. The constant attention. The constant presence. The constant integration of self with world. And what's strange is that this understanding is coming back. Not through technology, but through our growing awareness of what we've lost. There's a growing movement called sensory rewilding, where people are deliberately training their navigation circuits again. They're learning to navigate without GPS. They're learning to read landscapes and stars and wind. They're learning to trust their senses again. And what they're discovering is that the ancient skills aren't really lost. They're dormant. Your brain still has those neural circuits. They just need to be activated again. And once you start activating them, they come back quickly. After just a few weeks of deliberately practicing wayfinding without GPS, people report dramatic improvements. They develop a stronger sense of direction. They panic less when they get lost. They feel more present in their surroundings. They feel more alive. Because that's what navigation really is. It's not about knowing where you are. It's about being present with where you are. It's about the quality of awareness you bring to moving through space. Ancient nomads were so good at navigation because they weren't thinking about navigation at all. They were just present. They were just paying attention. They were just allowing their senses to integrate with the world around them. And in that presence, in that attention, in that integration, they knew where they were. Not because they had maps or coordinates or GPS, but because they were fully alive to the world. This is what we've lost. Not the ability to find our way, but the presence and attention required to be truly found. And here's the thing that should worry us. As our technology becomes more sophisticated, our dependence on it grows. We're not just using GPS for navigation anymore. We're using it for everything. Our phones tell us where to go, what to eat, who to talk to, what to think. We're outsourcing not just wayfinding, but our entire way of being in the world. And what that means is that we're losing something fundamental. Not just navigation skills, but the capacity for presence, the capacity for attention, the capacity for integration with the world around us. Ancient nomads understood something that we need to remember. The tools you use shape the person you become. If you use GPS, you become someone who needs GPS. If you use your senses, you become someone who can trust their senses. We have a choice. We can continue down the path of technological dependence, or we can choose to re-engage with the ancient skills, to train our brains again, to become present again, to allow ourselves to be navigated by the world, not just to navigate it. Ancient nomads didn't get lost because they weren't trying to find their way. They were being found by the world. They were allowing the landscape to speak to them. They were integrating with something larger than themselves. And that's a kind of navigation that no GPS will ever provide. That's a kind of being found that no technology can replace.